rapidly remembering magnesium levels is actually quite simple, and I'm going to share with you a very fun and basic way to memorize any kind of lab values. And later on today, I'll also share with you a more sophisticated way to remember any numbers related to medicine, or in fact anything in the world, and it'll make memorizing the basic metabolic table super fast, super easy. But let's just get started with the basics. If you like this kind of information, please be sure to hit that thumbs up. Get subscribed. This is Dr. Anthony Metivier from magneticmemorymethod.com. And what you see here is just the most basic way to start remembering numbers. So when we looked at those magnesium levels, we saw that there was a candle in that image and a boomerang and two swans. Well, in a very basic number shape system, you have a candle for 1, a donut for 0, 2 for swans, and the idea is that these images look like the number. So obviously a donut is not a 0, but it kind of looks that way. A candle is obviously not a 1, but it looks that way. A swan is not a 2, but it has that 2 implied in it. And then if we go to 3, you can have things like a mustache tipped on its side or handcuffs. This is from one of my books for kids called The Mystery of Magnetic Numbers. It actually isn't available yet, so you're getting preview images. 4 is like a sailboat, and you also can have a seahorse for 5, a fishing hook for 6, a boomerang for 7, and then a snowman for 8, and for 9 I usually use a golf club. I haven't really thought of a better image than a golf club for 9, but then the basic idea is when you get to your lab values is you just start to put these images together with the numbers. So if the range for sodium is 135 to 145, well, 135 is a candle and a mustache on its side, or it can be handcuffs and a seahorse. Now, you may not resonate with those images. You can come up with your own, but the idea is to have an object that represents every number from 0 to 9. And then when you got to learn a range like sodium, well, you put together something that helps you remember sodium with an image that helps you remember the numbers. So General Zod from Superman, maybe you're not familiar with that character, but Zod is like sodium. It's very similar sounding. And so we put that together, and we can have, a candle lighting his mustache on fire while a seahorse tries to put the fire out. And that makes that initial range, 135, very, very memorable. Now, for 145, as the upper range, you can add another image, or you could just kind of allow yourself to remember that it only has a range of 10. But this is where some of the more sophisticated techniques we'll talk about later come in. Let's just go through a couple more values. So potassium, 3.5 to 5. We can see the images reflected here because we have that mustache on its side, and that's always 3. And so now we have a banana for potassium, helping us remember that. And then the fact that it goes up to 5, well, we could add our seahorse here somehow. And you just want to make up a story, or whatever image you're going to use for 3 and 5. You could have interact with a banana, and bananas are just generally associated with potassium. But you may want to do something else. You may want to have like a pot smoker or something like that, because potassium has POT in it. And you could probably think of several famous pot smokers, and the more that you make it very, very specific, your associations, the better it's going to be, and specific to you in a personalized way, because the science of active recall shows us that the more we make our medical mnemonics personalized, the more they're going to pop for us when we're trying to remember information. So if it was blood, urea, nitrogen, 5 to 20, you can think about how you're going to do this. So BUN is a very common acronym for blood, urea, nitrogen, and you could have an actual hamburger bun. Try to think of what would be a specific hamburger bun if you can. I often think of my favorite buns that I had as a kid to really personalize that memory. And then you have your numbers. So 5 for seahorse. Nose now gets into the other more advanced system we're going to talk about later, and just bring those together, and that's going to help with that lab value. Creatinine, this is where the fishing hook comes in for 6. Fishing hooks look kind of like 6. And then what are you going to do to get in this kind of creatinine and remembering that? Well, you could imagine the creation of Adam and Eve, the idea of pulling out a rib to help create Eve. Whether you believe in those things or not is not required in order to use the story. And, you can actually have a fishing hook being drawn out of Adam's chest instead of a rib. Then 1.2, you can have either the candle or the swan, or you could use this more advanced system we'll talk about in a minute. Glucose. So Glenn Close and glue really get that word together, and then it's just a matter of coming up with your images for the numbers. In this case, I would use the more advanced system, 70 to 100, and for me, that would be the images of my Aunt Cassie and Tess of the Dubervilles. Explain that a little bit later. Calcium, 8.5 to 10.5. If we have literally a milk bottle and we have 8, well, that's going to be a snowman for me in the simple system. And that snowman is going to have a decimal point on one of his buttons, right? Or you could have one of his stone eyes represent a decimal system. So chloride, this is Chloe Sevigny. I often think of her for CH words or CHL words. And, there's not that many of them, but she's a great actress and comes immediately to mind. Here again, we have the more advanced system with a pail, and we'll get into an explanation of that. But let's just finish some of these lab value examples. Bicarbonate, 23 to 29. This is Joe Biden and bicarbonate sound quite similar. Soda, so he has a soda. Hey man, I'm going to drink this soda. Bicarbonate. And then Nam, Vietnam soldier here is Rambo. And then Jack Napier, that's the more advanced system that we'll talk about in a second. So you can start to use this for the comprehensive metabolic panel, and you can see here in this list, I have some of this all worked out. So AST, you can have an asp with a golf club, like a snake. That's, just something that you may want to use something else. But I was thinking of this snake on the astern part of the boat and the sailboat. Why is there a sailboat there? And why is there a golf club? Because we're going from 9 to 40. And so 4 is the sailboat image and 9 is the golf club image. And there's always a little bit of margin for error here, but as you grow with mnemonic skills, you'll be able to work this out. If we think about alternative, we have alternative band like Nirvana, and then with a boomerang, so that starts us off. The boomerang represents 7. The alternative band helps us remember this ALT. So if we take it back to magnesium here, we've got these options. We can use the candle and the boomerang to represent 1.7, and maybe the boomerang loses a little piece to help you remember that decimal. I find usually you just remember things like decimal quite simply, but if you struggle with that, just have an image in there, an association to help you with the decimal. Or you can, have the more advanced system, which helps take care of this a little bit. And then for 2.2, the 2 swans. And again, if you need something to help you remember the decimal, put a little association in there for the decimal. But let's talk about this more advanced version because it helps solve quite a few issues. I really like both and I use them interchangeably, but often for the magnesium level of 1.7 to 2.2, I would probably use this. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to learn the associations between numbers and consonants. And these numbers and consonants are very simple. 0 is a soft C, S, or Z. 1 is a D or T. 2 is an N. 3 is an M. 4 is an R. L is a 5. Ch, J, Sh, and so forth is a 6. 7 is a K. Some people use a hard G. I don't that often. 8 is an F or V. 9 is a B or P. And you can also have W for 3, which is essentially an M upside down. And some people use Y for K. And K kind of looks like a Y. So one of the images that I would have here is an image for 1 and 7, but I would turn it into 17. And for 2 and 2, I would have an image for 22. Now my images for 17 have to do with a guy named Tucker Max with a tack. And the reason why is because 7 is a K sound and 1 is a T sound. So what we end up having is the ability to make words. So if it's 1.7, then I would just look at 17 and I would have a tack in the hands of Tucker Max. And then for 22 or 2.2, that's N and N, so I would have a none. And so when we looked earlier at the bicarbonate, I think it was, then we had a Vietnam vet, which is 23, and then we had Jack Napier, N and P for Napier, and that's 29. So if I look back at the bicarbonate, then that's correct. There's the Vietnam vet, which is Rambo, and then Jack Napier. And it's just miraculous how that I can remember that, and it's quite quick. The only catch here with magnesium is the decimals. And I think you just normally, naturally remember the decimals, but if I needed a little image in there, I would just add it. In this particular case, I don't. So if you're finding this all useful, we'll go a little bit further, but hit that thumbs up if you're happy. Get subscribed. If you want to support the show, please grab a copy of How to Learn and Memorize Medical Terminology, and I'll have additional resources in the description, including a link to a write-up of all that you have encountered today. Now, just basically the general idea is to start having images for each and every 2-digit pair, and you can go to 100 and beyond. So earlier I mentioned tests of the D'Urbervilles, and the way that that works is that we have 1 for T, and then 0 can be an S, and I have this simple pattern memorized that you see on the screen, and it is very, very powerful, very beautiful how it all works. All I have to do is think, okay, so there's something with a 100 tests of the D'Urbervilles. You could use different images. You could use like a dissertation, which is D and then ISS, and that would have, you know, a different feeling and a different image, but you really just have to personalize it to yourself. And if we look at memorizing something like in coagulation studies that PTT is 30 to 40 seconds, well, then what we really want to do is look at PTT, figure out an image for it. So my personal trainer putting on a toque, or putting a toque on Mickey Mouse becomes 30 because 3 is M and 0 is S. And then 40 is Condoleezza Rice. And so I just need to have Mickey Mouse and Condoleezza Rice working there. And I would put them in a memory palace. Memory palaces are something you can learn a lot about when you are part of the magnetic memory method world. We talk about it on the Magnetic Medical Mnemonics podcast with Eve R, who's a nurse who has done very, very well with these techniques. And just generally, it's a great thing to learn. Basically, a memory palace looks like this. And this is a mock-up of a neighborhood that I used to live in, and I've memorized my TEDx talk in there. I've memorized all kinds of medical terminology in there. It's absolutely fantastic. And the way it would work is, let's say we're using the simple system, you would put a candle to remember one related to some of the other images that we've talked about today. And then if you had a 2 or a 3 or whatever the case is, you were going to have something related to that number and the images. So if we go back to the coagulation studies and we have 30 to 40 for PTT, then I'm going to have somewhere in this memory palace, maybe in this room or maybe in this open space here or maybe in the kitchen, I'm going to have my personal trainer putting a toque on Mickey Mouse. That's going to remind me of PTT 30, and Condoleezza Rice is going to be in there, and she's going to help me remember 30 to 40 for PTT in the coagulation studies. And then, of course, like, how are you going to remember the coagulation studies? Well, you just add another image that can help you with that. And sometimes you just got to think, coagulation. Well, CO, so I'll have Cookie Monster involved in here. I know this can all sound like a lot of elaboration, but like I said, there's a podcast with Ivar. He shows just how fast he comes up with images that are very specific to his nursing career. I come up with images on the fly with him. We have more examples than you could ever need, so please be involved in the growth and development of this channel, not only for yourself, but to help others work out these techniques. And as a brief review for magnesium specifically, you've got the 2 options. You've got a basic number elaboration system, which is number shape, so having a simple image for each digit from 0 to 9, or you can build out the major system. I've talked a lot about the major system in my work. It is my preference, but I use them both interchangeably, and they're very, very powerful to have. And one of the reasons why they're powerful to have is if you have 3-digit numbers, you can go 100 and above if you want, but I find it very useful often to just say, I've got an 88, and I have a particular image for 88, and then if it's 883, then I might have that image with a mustache, and then that helps me just not have to use some strange workup. I'm just switching between systems. So an example like that might be here. We have 40 to 120 for ALP. So Weird Al in a pool is the image for ALP, because Al and pool. And then, we can have these images built from different sources, like 4 for sailboat, or I could have Condoleezza Rice again, and then for 120 I can have Tintin for 12, and then he's with a donut, so that gets the 120. Ultimately, these are techniques that sometimes they can confuse you, but if you just put a weekend together to master it, both systems, you'll find that your mind works it out and you'll be able to remember. The trick is always just to place these associations in a memory palace based on a location with which you're familiar, and use images that are striking and familiar to you. So really, as cool as a donut is for 0, I also always have in mind Homer Simpson with a donut. For candle, I think of a birthday party where I remember my best friend when I was a kid blowing out the candles. For swans, I have very specific swans. My wife and I see them often when we go to a park. For the 3 with a mustache and the handcuffs, I think of my own characters that I've invented for my own fictional stories and so forth. And seahorse, I'm thinking very specific examples and so on. So, it's not just any snowman, but it's Frosty the Snowman, So always remember, if you want to really succeed with these techniques, to personalize, personalize, personalize. It's one of the keys. There certainly are some people who are exceptions to the rule who are able to just think in abstractions or unspecified mnemonic associations. I think they're quite few and far between. So if you're struggling with medical mnemonics, always remember, personalize, personalize. And if you think alphabetically, you're going to be able to personalize almost all the time. It just takes a little bit of practice, and it is so rewarding. So please get into it. It will reward you for years and years to come, and you'll be able to pass it on to others. All right, thanks for watching. Get subscribed if you're new here. Hit that thumbs up again, and I hope to see you on a future episode in the comments, or otherwise reach out by email. I'm easy to find. This is Anthony Metivier from magneticmemorymethod.com.